Thank you, Venkat. I think we'll ask Joseph to tell his points of view and how he likes or dislikes nephrologists taking up vascular surgeries. Joseph, can you share your slide?
Yeah, I can share my slide. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's really a great pleasure to join with you. I heard some very interesting presentations, and I'm really impressed by the quality of work done by so many young nephrologists. And I have only great admiration for what you have achieved in the presence of so many constraints and difficulties which I've gone through, and many of them are very familiar to me from my own experience. We are basically crossing the boundary from one specialty to another when we do these things, and it's a big challenge for us because we are comfortable in our own zone, and when we are crossing into another territory. So, can you see my slides now? Yeah. Can you see my slides all right?
Yes, yes. Yes, Joseph.
Okay. So this is not a rare problem in medicine. We often have this crossover boundaries. If you get a disc prolapse, who should operate on you? Is it a neurosurgeon or orthopedic surgeon? And if you need angioplasty, whether it's a vascular surgeon or cardiologist, if you have cleft lip in your child, will you have a pediatric surgeon or a plastic surgeon to operate? There are many such examples. So nephrologists are not alone in facing this situation. But the litmus test is, you must always ask, if you are the patient, what do you like to have? I heard a story about a famous cardiac surgeon in Chennai. He was asked, Dr. So-and-so, if you had a heart problem, where would you like to get treated? Apparently, he told that I would like to go to Texas Heart Institute and get operated by Kohli. And the friend then asked, why won't you get it done in Chennai? And the surgeon replied, because I can't operate on myself. So the story gives us a few lessons. First of all, the surgeon was supremely confident, like most cardiac surgeons are. Secondly, he wanted the best for himself. And thirdly, he thought that the best he could get only in Texas and not in India. So this is a very interesting lesson to learn from this. When we look at nephrologists, you have many modalities with which you treat your patients, and they are depending on skills which are possessed by other specialties. And often your patients need regular interventions. You need help in emergency situations, and need to have access to all the modalities of treatment for a particular patient. And quite often you will get frustrated if you don't have access to these facilities. But there is no one size fits all solution in this situation. It depends on where you practice. For example, in UK, if you are practicing the NHS, even if you want to do fistulas, you may not be able to do. You may come back and get trained, but it might be difficult to get the local authorities to allow you to do. There are some people who have now started doing interventions, but the open surgical fistulas, I think, as far as I'm aware, not many people are doing. And you also need to be sure about how much of your practice is going to be interventional, and do you have enough workload to keep your skills refreshed. And from what I heard so far, in the practice spectrum that you have, most of you seem to have enough workload, more than enough workload to keep your skills up to date, and in fact, perfect your skills as good as any other surgeon can. Because a number of cases which I have from Nepal and from Vellore, people have described, they are in hundreds, and I don't think many vascular surgeons or transplant surgeons will be doing this large numbers because they depend on referral from you. So if you can do so many numbers, then it should not be a problem to keep your skills up to date and refreshed by ongoing practice. And maybe for the occasional nephrologist who is more focusing on non-interventional practice, may not get enough cases to maintain these skills. But for people who are willing to do the interventional, from my limited experience after listening to you, I think you have enough number of cases to keep your skills up to date. The main issue is whether it's medico-legally and ethically safe. Ethically, we need to obviously give the best for our patients, what we would like for ourselves. But in terms of medical legal, you need to, as a body, come to some guidelines and some standards which you need to get approved by other professional bodies. It's going to be a delicate negotiation and going to be a politically very tricky task to do, but it's not something which has not happened before. Like vascular surgery, for example, was initially started by cardiovascular surgeons. There was no specialty like vascular surgery 100 years ago. And then slowly the cardiac surgeons started doing vascular work. And when they became too busy with the cardiac work, they neglected vascular surgery. And then there was a need for vascular surgery. So some cardiac surgeons became mainly vascular surgeons. And then over a period of time, some general surgeons got interested and they became general surgeons with vascular interest. And then further down the line, these vascular surgeons thought we are doing more and more vascular surgery. We do not need to do general surgery. And now they are becoming more separate. In the last 20 years, the specialty has changed so much that many vascular surgeons now try to become interventional endovascular surgeons. So within a span of 100 years, started by cardiothoracic surgeons, then there's a group of people who do both cardiac and vascular, then vascular and general, and then pure vascular, and now vascular and endovascular or pure endovascular. So these changes happen all the time in medicine, all specialties. And you're in the forefront of these changes, and you're doing the right thing to adapt. And once you have the motivation and the effort you are putting in, you should be able to adapt. But the medical legal issue is very important. I'm very glad that the people who are presented have enough data all documented and audited and presented. So once you have these numbers, you should have a very strong medical legal and governance wise. You will have a very strong defense if anything goes wrong. On the other hand, we need to know your boundaries. Like you're talking about doing only the radiocephalic fistulas and not going to do the brachiocephalic fistula or higher unless you become more confident. And then also for the occasional patient where you need to have some complication to be dealt with, it's good to have the good relationship with the vascular surgeons or cardiac surgeons, because you are obviously not competing with anybody. You want to provide the best for your patients. In my practice, about 80 to 90% of my work is radiological, even though I'm a surgeon. But I have a very clear idea where I will stop, where I will not try to dabble. And if it comes to that stage, I will pass on to the radiologist. But the problem in this political situation is the radiologists are often object to us saying that you do everything and you want to give us the difficult ones. And how will we keep our skills for our trainees and our radiologists to maintain the skills to do the difficult ones? Because difficult ones are usually the more challenging cases to do. But this is a problem which will never solve to the satisfaction of everybody. In my own experience, I started training in vascular surgery from 1989. In that time, only about 5-10% of patients are treated by interventions. And I used to do in those days AV shunts for nephrologists. But within the first 2 decades of my practice, more than 75% of vascular cases have to be treated by intervention. And now in my practice, hardly 10-20% need open surgery apart from some amputations. I do 1 or 2 bypass a year at the most. Most of my work is angioplasty and stenting. So even within my own practice lifetime, I have seen so many changes happening. So I started training in IR about 20 years ago. And now for the past 10 years, my practice is mainly IR. We need to know about the risks and benefits to our patients and to ourselves. Obviously, it depends on where you practice and how you practice. The risk to our patients is if you are practicing in a situation where you don't have support from the specialties on whom you depend, then the patients are at risk if you don't get trained. And as a clinician, if you don't train adequately and competently, then we may be exposing ourselves to criticism. And of course, then the situation of the patient coming with a bleeding fistula or a blocked graft on a weekend or in the middle of the night when the vascular surgeon or radiologist not keen to come and help you, what do you do with those patients? Boundaries in the specialties exist for a reason. Sometimes they are based on historical reasons, like system-based specialties like gastroenterology, neurology, or anatomical specialties like head and neck cancer and things like that. And the skill set and clinical mindset differs in each specialty. when you train as a physician, apart from the occasional biopsies or drainage, most of our specialties in medicine, you do not have hands-on interventional training. And I can see that it's changing now in nephrology. And when you train as a surgeon, you tend to ignore the uh, more medical-based subtle skills in your training. And even within surgical specialties, like the attitude and the mindset of a plastic surgeon or a microvascular surgeon might be completely different to the mindset of a orthopedic surgeon or a gynecologist, because the specialty shapes your attitude and their mindset. You become very deliberate and very cautious and persistent if you are doing very fine work. But technologies constantly keep disrupting what we train for our whole lifetime. When I was a trainee, there are many surgeons whose entire work was peptic ulcer surgery. And within our lifetime, starting from antacids to H. pylori eradication, peptic surgery is almost gone now. When I started, there were so many gynae wards full of hysterectomy patients. In UK, at least, hysterectomy is extremely rare because most patients are treated by hormones and endometrial ablation and uterine embolization. We very rarely see patients undergoing hysterectomy. And when I trained in surgery, we used to do a lot of bile duct stone surgery, and now they are all dealt with by ERCP. So same way in your specialty, when more and more need for interventions happen, it's good that you are ready to adapt, and it's important to keep up to date. But technology can suddenly disrupt our experience and practice. What you are trained for a lifetime may suddenly become unnecessary or redundant. There may not be any market for that. So some other specialties may be on the not completely becoming extinct, but their role may be very limited. We see what's happening in cardiothoracic surgery now. Valve surgery, which was mainly the preserve surgeons, is now slowly get taken over by cardiologists. And in vascular surgery, most of the work is now taken over by intervention. And we need to be always uh, aware about the changes happening, and we have to be adapting to the new skills and techniques that we need. And the healthcare models where we practice also might influence what you do. Because if you're practicing in an academic institute where you have 24/7 vascular surgeon and transplant surgeon cover, then there may not be a need for you to put a lot of effort and time and labor into learning skills. You can focus on what you're interested in. On the other hand, if you are practicing in the area where the support you need from other specialties is lacking, then you may have to get into that. Whether every nephrologist should get trained in all the interventions is for you as a professional body to decide and take it forward. But my personal opinion is when you start going along this route, there will be some procedures which will be probably appropriate for every nephrologist, like simple bradycephalic fistula, simple brachiocephalic fistula. But there will be always cases where you will have a complex graft or a redo surgery or thrombectomy or a radiological unblocking of a thrombus fistula. So you need to know where to stop. So you will still need collaboration and help and support from allied specialties, but we need to at the same time try to do as much as possible ourselves within the limitations. Because choice is a very great thing to have, but unfortunately we do not choose where you practice or what type of support you will get. So each person has to adapt to the situation they are in. But very important to make sure that we maintain the same standards, irrespective of which specialty you operate. You might be a nephrologist doing a fistula or a vascular surgeon or a urologist or a transplant surgeon. But as far as the patient is concerned, we must make sure that we all provide the same high standard. And there should not be any difference in the outcome for the patient, depending on who does the procedure. And that takes a lot of hard work, like Dr. Shrestha from Nepal. I admire the time he has spent visiting so many centers and done so much work. And I've seen so many people in vascular surgery also. There's a specialist in London who does complex venous work, mostly operating on deep veins and recanalizing DVTs and recanalizing blocked IVCs. He had been to almost every center in the world where this work was done before he started on his own. So that's the right thing to do and the admirable thing to do. And you will always find politics and turf war between one specialty and the other. It's difficult to avoid that, but as long as you have the right attitude and you know that you are doing the right thing for your patients and for yourself, we have to try to be at peace with everybody, but it's not always possible. I have had several problems when I wanted to train endovascular. There have been some well-known professors who spoke to the radiologist who was training me and asked me to stop training me. And after I got reasonably trained, I wanted a certificate from some of the radiologists who helped me to train angioplasty, and they refused. They told me that we know that you can do these things, but if you give a certificate saying that you are capable of doing this, we will be in trouble from our society and our colleagues. So after getting reasonably good training in doing angioplasties, because none of the radiologists who trained me would certify me, and I was working in the NHS where if I didn't have a piece of paper saying that I am trained to do these things, I had to go abroad to Dublin for 6 months to work with a surgeon who was doing angioplasties. And he, at the end of it, gave me a paper saying that he had done fellowship in endovascular surgery. And with that, I was able to come back and start my work within the NHS. And the training opportunities may be very limited for the upcoming nephrologists because they may not all have the same opportunity to learn AV fistulas in the various centers they train. It will be well and good if they have training from senior nephrologists who are already doing these procedures, but there may be centers where they don't get this opportunity. And the best thing for you will be to have a pool of senior nephrologists who are already doing it, and for them to provide adequate opportunities by pooling the resources and having adequate training programs so that the next generation who wants to train may get the opportunity. And when you go into a new specialty, it is not easy. I'm sure Dr. Shrestha would agree. You have to learn completely different sets of skills, and you may have to go as a junior to learn, even though you may be a consultant nephrologist already. And the main thing is you should not try to be an occasional operator in any procedure. You can do that in the emergency, but most of the fistulas are elective procedures. They are not middle of the night emergency operations. So you must aim for the same level of quality and standards and outcomes like what will happen when the best operator does, whether it's a surgeon or a nephrologist. And we must have the same criteria for certifying and auditing outcomes. And we should be prepared for criticism, but as long as we do the right thing, that's okay. And this is a bit of a repetition of what I told you earlier. In my opinion, it's nice to have a choice, but it's not for everyone, but not for every area and not for every type of healthcare provider. But each of us has to adapt what is the right thing for our own practice and our own patients. Regarding AV fistula, most of the previous speakers have very elegantly explained, and it's a delicate surgical skills, and I am very impressed by the quality of work produced by them. It's a small vessel anastomosis, so you may find that you can manage without a magnification now, but when you are 10 years older, probably you find having a loop is definitely useful. And sometimes you may encounter calcified diseased vessels, which might pose you a problem. And because it's as I told you, because the planned procedure, its best outcome must be always achieved. And we need to remember about the potential complications. And I'm glad they have mentioned the complications, which are commonly hematoma, bleeding, lymphocyte, and of course failure. And hand ischemia complications are fortunately not very frequent. The key elements are counseling the patient, timing. We depend a lot on imaging pre and post procedure. We do routinely duplex all the patients before they have the fistula, so that before we take the patient for operation, not just based on our clinical examination, we have a ultrasound scan image showing the diameter of the artery, the quality of the veins, whether it's a phlebitic or not, whether it has had previous thrombophlebitis, whether the central veins are okay, whether the vein and artery are close to each other or not, whether there are any diseased valves. All these things we try to get as much information as possible before you start the procedure. So if you can do ultrasound scanning and get this information before you do, then your failure rate will become even less than what you have already. And we also follow these patients every 3 or 6 months by an ultrasound scan just to see if there are any developing stenosis, particularly if you find problems during the dialysis, when any reflow or any high pressure, then we get these patients imaged to know whether there's any thrombus or any occlusion or any stenosis in the outflow veins or inflow arteries, and then we fix them. And if you do that, then we can avoid thrombus or failure fistula. And I'm not doing as many fistulas now as I used to do in the past, but in my practice, when I used to do them regularly, duplex imaging was very paramount. It's non-invasive, it gets loads of information, but it's highly operator dependent. It's very cheap to do, but there's a very huge shortage of skilled operators. And if you want to learn duplex scanning by yourself, that's another skill to learn and another time to invest in learning the skill. If you have time, I can show you a few duplex scans.
I think we'll have a separate session sometime, Joseph. I think you very nicely gave the practical and as well as the philosophical approach to the problem of shifting or taking an attempt in another specialty. I think we greatly enjoyed it. I think this is going to arouse a lot of discussion and points from the panelists and the audience. And if you enter just now, I think we'll be dragged for long. So quickly, we'll stop here and ask Atul to finish his small presentation, then come back to discussion. I hope interested people will remain.